Welcome to the Giraffe Social Media Podcast. It's what social media managers are talking about. I'm Chloe Belchamber, and on today's episode, I'm direct messaging freelance SEO consultant and small agency owner James Taylor. We'll be discussing the ins and outs of search engine optimization, why it's important for your business, and how to get on top of it. Welcome to the podcast, James.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
No worries. Where are you joining us from today?
Just outside of Manchester in Failsworth.
Oh, nice. I can hear it from your accent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as you may or may not know, we love to kick off our interview episodes with a round of quick-fire questions. So clear your mind and get ready for whatever we throw at you.
Done.
First question is Netflix or YouTube?
YouTube.
Swimming or sunbathing?
Sunbathing.
Manchester or London?
Oh, come on. Manchester.
Music or podcasts?
Podcasts.
Work from home or work from the office?
Work from home, even though I do have an office, but still work from home.
It's better, isn't it? I can't lie. Museum or amusement park?
I'm pretty sad I'm going to have to go with museum.
I love that. More money or more free time?
More free time.
Watch sports or play sports?
Watch.
Facebook or Twitter?
Instagram?
Love that, yes. I'm the same. And finally, bottomless brunch or big night out?
Big night out. I think we're all due one after lockdown, so.
We certainly are. Yes, I can't wait for that. Right. Well, let's jump straight into the interview. My first question for you is, how long have you been interested in SEO and how did you first get into it?
Yeah, so I sort of, I guess I found out during uni. So I did a degree in advertising and brand management, which is, I guess, loosely related. And at the time, sort of everything was still sort of fairly new, and so there wasn't really any digital specific sort of courses, but there was little modules within that, and part of that was a more generic digital marketing course. But through that, I managed to do an internship for an agency based out in Altrincham. I was only there for a couple of weeks. It's just like a tiny one. But based on that, that was just like seeing how agencies run, and I sort of got the SEO bug. For my dissertation, I wrote about local SEO. And as part of that, I interviewed 10 different agency owners. And I'll be honest, the main reason was just, with the hope that one of them would offer me a job. Turns out that one of them did offer me a job, so that was successful. And I ended up just going straight into agency life, pretty much immediately from uni. So did the dissertation, and then ever sort of since finding out about SEO, I had my own little sites and was doing affiliate websites and blogs and that sort of stuff. And it just sort of snowballed. So I always did little bits of freelance whilst I was working for the agencies that I've been working for. And then it just got to the point where I just very slowly started to, think about the full time. Then I went part time at an agency, and then I made the jump. I was almost accidentally sort of growing a remote agency in the background anyway, essentially just really good freelancers that I was working with anyway, which just meant that I could sort of offer what the agencies were doing, but because we were remote before remote was cool, it just meant that the prices were pretty much exactly the same as hiring a freelancer, because it's just a little remote team really, and it's just snowballed from there.
Yeah, nice. Well, before we go any further, do you mind giving us the rundown on what SEO is and why it's important?
Yeah, so I mean, essentially what you're doing is taking steps to make your website more favourable for search engines, more specifically within organic search results. Google is notorious with algorithm updates and things like that to keep people on their toes. So, what worked 10 years ago certainly doesn't work now. It's quite a slow process, certainly, compared to something like pay-per-click or Facebook ads and that sort of stuff. There's no real immediate sort of gain. It's much more of a long-term strategy. But naturally, once you get to position one organically, it costs a lot less. So then, it's starting off not really seeing anything, but understanding that you're doing it in 12 months' time to get to the point where you can start to scale back on those paid budgets, because ultimately there's not as much that goes into spend organically. Once you are there, you're then just sort of retaining.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like you've been in the business for a while now, and you just mentioned that it's constantly changing. So has SEO changed a lot over the past few years, and what kind of areas are different now?
Yeah, so even when I first started about 10 years ago, it was still quite spammy. So things like stuffing a load of keywords into a page. People used to do things like they'd hide keywords and big walls of text behind a white page, thinking that Google's not just gonna, not gonna pick up on it. And that sort of stuff, you could argue it still works to an extent, but things have changed. It's Google's forced spammers to become marketers, and the ones that didn't want to sort of do that are the ones that essentially got hit by things like manual penalties and sort of wiped off the face of Google, and increasingly things like page speed and usability. So it's not just all about how many keywords you can stuff into a page anymore.
Definitely. And I mean, I've done a little bit of research in prep for this interview, and I know that there are three key areas of SEO, but can you talk us through it?
Yeah, so I'd sort of categorize that as on-page SEO, off-page, and more technical aspects, I guess. So on-page SEO is sort of everything that you can see on the page, and to an extent things behind the scenes as well. So things like metadata, headings and the use of heading structures, how the page itself is structured, and the type of content that's going onto that page as well, how you use keywords effectively. That, coming back to that point on sort of, it isn't about how many keywords can we get for best dog walker in Manchester onto a page anymore. And then there's off page, which is link building essentially. So getting links from other websites to yours, which Google essentially sees as a vote of confidence. That's something else that has evolved and continues to evolve. So, sort of in the early days of Google, and with more notoriously spammy SEOs, things like link networks and private blog networks, where people would essentially buy their own websites and link to ones internally. Again, Google's sort of getting wise to that sort of thing. It does still work, again, to an extent, but there's ways to do it more legitimately. So, like I said, Google's forcing the spammers to become marketers. So the link building as a process has certainly evolved from sort of, looking for more spammy sites. Now it's much more digital PR led. So doing things like surveys and creating your own data and sort of big resources and landing pages, ultimately positioning yourself as an authority, which is what Google wants to see. So like I say, it's no longer about how can we trick Google. It's more about, let's position ourselves as the authority that Google wants to see, and creating trust around the brand. And then, yeah, so technical SEO, which takes up a big part of what I do with things like audits and that sort of stuff. More generically, I suppose it's about speed and usability at the end of the day. So there are things like, if you've got broken pages and the flow of your site and things like that. But for me, tech SEO is all about how usable actually is your site. Is it really slow? Does it offer a good user experience? And if it doesn't, what are the steps that we can take to address that?
Ah, super interesting. So if you have a slower web page, does that mean you're less likely to show up at the top of Google's feed?
You're going to get a lot of answers like this from me, but yes and no. So I suppose, I mean, ultimately, Google's looking to serve the most contextual and relevant site for whatever the query is. So if it's something super specific that doesn't have a lot of competition or search volume, then it doesn't matter as much. But when you're talking, going after keywords with volumes in the 6 and 7 figures, you could certainly argue that if your site offered a better experience than one in, say you position one and position two, then it's those little things that can have a massive impact. So when you went at that level, certainly, at the lower level, probably not so much, but it's not something I'd ignore regardless of the levels of competition that you're up against.
There you go. Well, I saw on a recent infographic by Graphic Rhythm that SEO drives around 1,000% more traffic than organic social media alone. What kind of results can a business expect when investing in SEO?
So, like I said, it depends. Is the real answer. So yeah, my approach to this is let's pick our battles. So you're always going to get something, but to what extent that you're going to get depends massively on the levels of competition that you're up against, and ultimately the level of investment for SEO. Um, so what's really important to me is that we do sort of an initial analysis to say like, okay, is your budget itself, is it feasible based on what we can see competition are doing? So like, for example, if your competition were running big digital PR campaigns, they were publishing 200,000 words of content every month, and you come in with £100 monthly budget and you want to write 500 words a month, naturally we're going to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's all about picking your battles. So if that was the case, we do, try to target the search queries with less competition. And then as your authority starts to grow and you gain the backlinks and you ultimately gain that trust, then you can start to target keywords with higher levels of competition. Um, I can certainly see the point though of, if you had a decent amount to spend that was sort of aligned with the sector, if you like. So like, the top five websites that we all think they're doing X, Y, Z. So we need to do this, this minimum amount to compete, and then anything on top of that, brilliant. So if that was the option, then yeah, I think what was that, 1,000% more? 1,000%
Yes.
the traffic. So I
Uh-huh.
think, obviously when it's done well, the sort of appeal of it is that you can be much more specific in terms of obviously the queries and things like that that you're targeting. And that's sort of where people get disillusioned with SEO, I think, is obviously it's not a quick process and they often don't pick their battles from the outset. So they'll just try and immediately compete with whoever's on page one or whoever's in the top position. But they might have been spending 6 figures on SEO for the last 10 years. So it's all about sort of putting things into context. Like I say, it's certainly not impossible for any site to get a really decent return on SEO, say in the first 12 months. It's just about getting that initial data, and then what do you do with that data, and how do you put together a realistic strategy based on where that site is at the time that they're starting, and then how you can sort of estimate where they'll end up, and then where that strategy sort of grows within that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've pretty much just answered my next question, which is, are these results something that happens overnight? And I guess the answer is no.
Um, oh no, I'm not going to say yes and no again.
Yes and no.
Yeah, so if we launched a site tomorrow, then naturally it's going to take quite a long time to run. I mean, a long time. Again, it depends on the levels of competition. So, I have an affiliate portfolio, so like multiple different blogs and that sort of thing that I run just as side projects and stuff. When you're talking low levels of competition, it's fairly easy if your pages are quite dense with content and you're publishing regularly to get some at least initial traffic in the first few months. But then I'm targeting very specific sort of question-based queries. So if I'm competing with a forum that's 20 years old and it's not been updated, then chances are I'm going to be able to outrank it fairly quickly. Um, the sort of immediate wins, I think, for anyone with a site already, if they were thinking about hiring an agency or a freelancer, is starting off with an audit to get that data to look at quick wins. So in terms of what are the keywords that are in, say, positions 1 to 15, and what can you do to sort of bump those up? So any that are sort of mid-page one, so say 5 to 15, something like that. And there will certainly be opportunities based on the data. So that's what I'd see as sort of a quick win, but not quick in the sense of if you launch a site and you're also up against high levels of competition. Because there's the other angle as well of, there's any form of SEO really, you're sort of going against Google in the sense of, it's organic growth and you're forcing it at the end of the day. So you have to be careful about how quickly you do that as well. So any process has to look as natural as possible. So, it's not to say that it's spammy in any sense, but, you don't want to get on Google's radar for the wrong reasons, and sort of trying to speed up the process is where people can get a bit stuck as well.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask you, you've obviously been doing this for a little while now. What are some of your most trusted SEO best practices?
Yeah, so I think, like I say, the first thing for me is doing an audit with a competition analysis and keyword research. So that competition analysis includes looking at gap data. So if we were like, okay, we've already got a site and we're ranking for X, Y, Z, but these sites are ranking above us, or what our competition actually ranking for. I find it interesting to look at, what they're not ranking for, or maybe what they're not doing as well on as they could be, because there could be an opportunity to jump straight in there based on that gap data. So that's really helpful, sort of just from the quick wins angle as well. Naturally you sign a client on a retainer, you want to get some quick wins in and to get them invested in the process. Like I say, it's not something like paid advertising where you can just turn it on and turn it off and they can immediately see the results. So as many quick wins that are feasible, and you're obviously not forcing things, but any that would make sense and are contextual and look natural to Google, then we're going to jump on those. Link building is really important and something that a lot of website owners often get wrong. What I've been seeing recently, which works really well, is putting together statistics and data landing pages. So I have a client who ranks for an office hygiene data page. So you can imagine over the last 12 months, that's been absolutely great timing. And at the time of publishing, we got in like the Metro and Yahoo News, and also links from industry sites as well. And a lot of the data is readily available from press releases and sites like Statista and that sort of stuff. So there's things like that where it's a much slower growth, but journalists and publishers are looking for stats to include in a lot of their content. So they will just Google like whatever the sector is plus stats 2020 or 2021. And that sort of stuff. So that's a very natural one because you can get links to that page over time, and then you internally link to the pages that are sort of your commercial pages, if you like. So you'd internally link to service pages and whatever else it might be. And you can do that for almost any site. You can do it for if you're an agency, if you have an affiliate site. I've done that for affiliate sites as well as a test. So that's a really good one. And then blogger outreach angle is great as well. So if you can do like blogger gifting or approaching legitimate bloggers to offer them some content, just say, can I write for you? And in exchange of providing you, say, 1,000 words of content, can I send a link? Can I, when I send the content back, can I provide a link to my client? Again, there's a lot of analysis that goes into that. And like I was saying, with people sort of slipping up with link building, if you go on sites like Fiverr, that the type of sites that they'll have, to look at, they might look great, but it's obviously what's going on behind the scenes. So, what level of authority do they have? Are they linking out to, I suppose, what we deem to be more suspect or spammy sites? And could what they're linking out to cause an issue 6 months down the line? If it led to a manual penalty, then obviously that's only going to be negative for your site. So there's a lot of checks in the background that go on with that. But a mix of sort of digital PR and outreach into legitimate bloggers and publishers is a fantastic approach to link building. And it's not even really about the quantity either. I've ranked sites with way less links than the competition. It's just that the links that sort of are present are contextual and the quality are really high, they're from legitimate sites as well. I'm just thinking of some other tips whilst I'm here. Sort of things that I wish I'd been told. Okay, yeah. So I've got two more as well, if we've got time.
Absolutely.
Real. So long tail content. So sort of targeting keywords that are variants of what we call the short tail. So if it was something like, say, t-shirts was the short tail, and then long tail might be something like how are t-shirts made. That's a really bad example. Um, but naturally, the levels of competition for something more generic are quite high. Whereas something for a frequently asked question or a question-led search, it tends to be the levels of competition tend to be lower, but the search volumes themselves are still feasible to go after. So, sort of creating a hub around FAQs and long tail content is fantastic because obviously you're still targeting the right sort of people that you want going onto your site, and if anything, you're positioning yourself as an authority because you're publishing the type of content that provides the specific answer that they're looking for, and so that's a really good one as part of a blog process rather than writing blogs for blog's sake. Because again, it's not really going to do much. So exactly the same as you would do with analysing your category or your commercial pages. If you put in a blog strategy together, it's exactly the same process of who are we up against for the lower level terms. Is there any gap data that we can jump on? What's the average length of content of articles that are ranking? Is there anything that they're missing in terms of do they provide unique data? Do they have links going to them? Are there any stats we can add and that sort of stuff? So yeah, just a more considered approach to how you put together sort of a blog strategy as well. And then, sorry, I'm getting on to my final point. My
No, it's
final point
great.
is page speed. So just being aware of, I suppose, more broadly usability. So, like I say, Google's focus increasingly is on user experience and how quick your site is to load, both for users and for the browser and for search engines, and sort of providing a seamless experience. So you can use tools like PageSpeed Insights and Lighthouse, which are Google's own tools. There's external ones. GT Metrics is a pretty good one, and webpage.org or something like that. Sorry, I know that's wrong, but if you Google that, you'll find what I'm talking about. So there's a couple of different sites where it sort of breaks down your page load in a waterfall format. So if there are, say, images that are really big that need to be compressed, or certain files that need to be removed for that specific page, you can see them as they load, sort of thing. So that's really helpful as well. And just sort of being aware of if you're on a shared server for £2 a month, maybe get off that. It's only gonna if you're on a server with 200 other websites, then naturally it's not going to be as fast as a dedicated one. And you can get dedicated servers and dedicated hosting packages for fairly cheap now anyway, but they make such a big difference. So I think people get a bit caught up on the finer details around like removing render blocking scripts and minification and compression, and obviously they're really important, but you could do all of that until you're blue in the face. But if you're still on a rubbish hosting package that you're never going to get the amazing page speeds than if you were on one, because then you're starting from a really good sort of standpoint if you're on one that's optimized in the first place, essentially. Sorry,
Wow.
got there in the end.
No, oh my goodness, it's great to hear someone so passionate about it, and I'm sure that's really great advice for the listeners as well. I want to jump quickly, I guess, to the other end of the spectrum and ask you, what's the number one mistake you see people making when it comes to search engine optimization?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is that they don't pick their battles in the beginning, and that's I get a lot of inquiries through where website owners or business owners might have worked with a freelancer or an agency and just say, we did it for 12 months and it just didn't work. And, I don't think SEO works. And it's certainly not the case because I wouldn't have a job. So it's more about, using that data at the start to pick your battles and being realistic about what you can do based on where your site is at in terms of its level of authority and the wider level of authority of sites that you're competing with. Because otherwise you're just going to get really disillusioned with the process, and it already doesn't help that it's not an immediate process in the first place. So obviously if you spend 6 months going down, just trying to target keywords that you're never going to rank for with a brand new website, but you don't really know much about SEO, then obviously you just be like, it doesn't work.
Mhm.
Whereas if you do that more strategic approach, then it's much more realistic that, 12, 24 months down the line that you can be ranking for the things that you want to be.
Amazing. Well, naturally, we've been chatting about why SEO is a great investment for brands and businesses, but are there any instances where it won't provide a decent return on investment?
Um, I suppose again, it's all about the budget that you have anyway, and like I say, the levels of competition that you're up against, and as well, things like if your product or service is very brand led, then it might not be something that you have to really worry about. But for more commercial things like e-commerce and service led terms where it's not just about brand, then it can certainly provide a return on investment. I think again, it's sort of not if you are inquiring about SEO. Just making sure that whoever you're talking to does their research up front, and they can quite clearly say to you, I think it's realistic that we go ahead with this budget given what we're up against. I think it's quite disingenuous for anyone to say, give me this amount and I will get you to this position within 6 months. I think it's very hard for anybody to say that because, well, one, Google could flick a switch on their algorithm and turn what we were doing yesterday on its head. Pretty unlikely, but we know what Google's like. Um, and also, there are unfortunately people out there who will just say yes and take the money because they're just banking on the client not understanding the process. So I think it's just really important for anyone who's sort of considering whether outsourcing or attempting it in house, that you personally get at least a bit of a baseline understanding about how long things take, and if you are going to look to the long term, which you do need to do with SEO anyway, what that looks like in terms of spend and how realistic the strategy is sort of before you go ahead with it.
You touched on Google there. Let's talk about Google a little bit and some of the limitations there are when it comes to SEO rankings, because I heard on the grapevine that sometimes it's maybe not always the best.
Yeah, so I think I suppose limitations that I see are certainly for the types of sites where the user experience is just shocking. So sites that might have been built 10, 15 years ago, and they're not optimized for mobile, which is obviously massive in this day and age, both for users and for Google. So straight away you're on the back foot because Google's looking to, if you're up against other sites that are optimized for mobile, tablet, desktop, they're providing a fluid experience, then naturally you're not going to be rewarded regardless of how good your content is. So I think that's sort of where people see issues, and there's with the Core Web Vitals update that's come in, and I'm sure that'll be one of many sort of page speed updates and things relating to wider usability. Um, Now more than ever, it's super important that you're not only serving a site that's fast, but just provides that fluid experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to finish on maybe a lighter note. What has been your biggest SEO win?
So I think probably I've had a number of affiliate sites that have done really well in terms of like just recurring revenue. So things that where I tested stuff and thought, is this actually going to work? And then it does work. Um, so I think for anyone doing affiliates, I'd say sort of maybe focus on one site to begin with and run it as if it's its own little business. So I think people sort of see, well, all right, this is like the golden egg keyword. I'm going to go after best diet pills or something, because it's got a £100 commission or whatever, and then very quickly realise the levels of competition are through the roof. So yeah, so some great affiliate wins in terms of site flips and that sort of stuff. I think commercially, the client that I mentioned at the start, with the hygiene page, that was a great one because when I started working with them, their site was actually de-indexed. So basically, whoever had built it had left the development robots text file in there, so it just meant that it wasn't being crawled in the first place. And then within 12 months, they did over six figures of revenue from their site. So they'd gone from basically no visibility whatsoever, and with a fairly modest budget, to six figures within 12 months, through the things like the content and the link building and that really nice digital PR piece. So that's always one I like to brag about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those. That's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining me, James.
No worries. Thank you.
No problem. And if our listeners want to, get some help with SEO, where can they find you?
JamesTaylorSEO.co.uk. You'll see my cringy YouTube videos on there as well. So you'll find my YouTube profile, and I have a blog talking about all this sort of stuff as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, or follow us if you're listening on Spotify. We would love to hear what you thought about today's interview, so make sure you reach out on social media and let us know what you thought. We've been Giraffe Social Media. You've been amazing. We'll see you next time.